Welcome to the first episode of Let Me Have the Last Say. Let Me Have the Last Say is an educational podcast by myself which seeks to educate and provide context into current topics. It looks at an argument from different angles, seeking to flesh out the reasons behind the fervent voices made by the people within the VTuber community. The podcast does not intend to provide a definitive conclusion to the arguments. Those are left to the listener's discretion. For episode 1, we'll be looking at the Americanization of the internet, specifically on Twitter itself, as well as looking at it from a Southeast Asian lens and how this affects a lot of Southeast Asians. Due to the nature of this topic, there will be at least 3 different terms that we will need to understand and look towards. And so let us discuss those terms first. So the first one will be globalization, specifically cultural globalization. As you know, we are now living in a day and age where it's so easy for us to pick up culturally a new culture, and this ties into the idea of cultural globalization, the transmission of ideas, values, meanings around the world, and these are absorbed through various means, such as an example, K-pop. K-pop is an example of a type of cultural globalization where the more it gets spread out, it becomes something that we have embraced, and it's become a type of culture that globally worldwide we're seeing a lot more people are getting to the Korean phase itself. So this shows the evolution and the formation of shared norms and knowledge that people start to associate with. Okay, and that builds and forms a type of cultural identity, and this increasing interconnectedness also brings and fosters a bond between different populations and cultures itself, and it varies depending on where and how and what we are looking at. Now, because I am talking about the Americanization of the internet, we also need to look at Americanization itself, and what does that mean? So that means the action of making a person or thing American in character or nationality, and that can come about also in terms of certain traits that we see in America that is separate. It's very Western, so it's very separate from, say, an Southeast Asian mentality and mindset. And the last term that we're going to be will be part of this topic as well, it will be soft power. So what is soft power? Soft power is just the ability for a country to influence others without resorting to coercive pressure. Okay, not with coercive means. War is an example of a hard coercive mean. Now, in practice, this just means that for a country itself, through the use of soft power, they're able to project values, ideas, and culture across borders, and that helps to, again, foster goodwill and strengthen partnerships. So soft power and globalization actually goes hand in hand, because globalization is a type of soft power that is being used. And so again, going back to the fact that you've got K-pop, you've got anime and manga, these are the types of mediums that have acted as soft power that helps bring the culture and identity of Japan and Korea to light, and it is now being embraced by millions of people around the world. Now, so I've given you an explanation about globalization. Okay, so you have an idea of what globalization means and what it's all about in a soft sense. Now, obviously, globalization has its pros and cons, and in this particular podcast that we're looking into, we're going to talk about like what it means when a social media is so embraced by a certain type of culture, and in this case, Americanization of it, right? That it loses certain impact, and it creates this space where we are seeing disgruntlement happen. Not very forthcoming, obviously. This is very low key, but it is there, and we're seeing it very predominantly with a lot of Southeast Asians, a lot of Asians itself, and I'm not entirely sure if it's by nature we have decided and we have chose to be quiet, or it's merely because the voices on the internet are a lot louder. So let's talk about it from the starting again back from like globalization itself, right? So globalization has been around for a lot, but it has serious practical consequences. Because the act of globalization itself, it promotes dominant values and cultural practices, which have visions on how to deal with life, and practical uses in many sense that helps people push forward, right? But then a lot of these have those effects where we are starting to notice that when you talk about globalization, a lot of times globalization is very centered around the introduction of American culture to the whole world. In fact, in so many ways, it is very Americanized, and that's kind of why we're starting to, we see a huge adoption of things that maybe in our culture we wouldn't have thought about. So think about, like, for example, McDonald's. McDonald's is an example of American globalization, where we have adopted and taken that into parts and parts, and we have it everywhere. Every country you go to, there's another McDonald's. You can't outrun that. But similarly, this is also the same when it comes to on the internet, when it comes to soft power and the cultural globalization, where we are starting to see the ideology, the American ideology that is being spread around the world. And a lot of it has to do also with the types of traits that you will typically find with America itself. And we're talking about traits that values that are and form the basis of traditional American values, like individual freedom, self-reliance, equality of opportunity, competition, material wealth, hard work, right? All these 6 values that kind of cascade down. And that is where we're seeing like a widespread of that on the internet. But here's the thing. I want to zone in on individual freedom. I want to zone in on equality of opportunity and competition. These 3 I feel are very, very important. And I say this because from what I can gather and I can see right now, individual freedom in America is huge, especially now in the wake of things where a lot of more topics that are relevant towards that country are coming out increasingly. Me Too is an example of where, this is bringing about like inequality of the opportunity, right? The individual freedom of a woman, especially in situations where gender equality is not being upheld, and there's no individual freedom, for these women to be able to make a stand. Their voices are being drowned out by the men in power. And I know that this touches a lot on gender politics at this stage, and I do not want to go too deep into that because that is missing the point of this podcast itself. But essentially, when you look at these, right, these topics itself sprang about because it was a whole dissonance where people are starting to get frustrated and upset that they weren't able to voice out certain topics itself. And so you start to see the internet eventually adopt this sort of Americanization of these values as well. And I say that because you can see that the idea of campaigning and fighting for for equality, recognition in culture perspectives, recognition in certain values were springing about from America. And it's not just America alone. We're starting to look at a lot more Western countries as well that are participating in it, and they are here to say a message to the people, to voice out the frustration as fellow audiences in America or in the Western country where their voices are unheard. And I feel that's mostly for countries where it's very clear that minorities, any sort of minorities, are facing difficulties because of the legal system, because of just society values there. And this was a cry, a plea to make changes, to make the difference. So I get that. That I don't think is an issue, but because it's so out there, there is that reverse exploitation of culture that comes along with this. And this comes with the fact that there's cynicism, there's apathy, there is, a sort of postmodern detachment of the individual from any other concerns than his or her own. And in that sense, that it means that now you, as an audience that is not part of the problem, becomes part of the problem because your voice, who gives a damn, right? And so you're seeing that because like it's either you're with me or against me. And this so-called Americanization is not good because that's how America is presenting itself to the rest of the world. And that penchant for national self-absorption, self-congratulation, and you know, self-exposure, self-criticism that are putting out there, it bleeds in. Okay, it bleeds in. Given the fact that globalization, even if it means commodification of culture, it doesn't necessarily mean that what happens only in America isn't like bleeding in and being transposed or being forcefully pushed down into and being I guess like shoved into the faces of people outside of America. And I think that this has to do also with the fact that, you know, now that the internet is so widely accessible by all, there is no clear line or clear definition of what is so-called America and what is not America. This has it's got its own effects towards Southeast Asians. And an example I would give would be one which I read recently on the internet, and this was by a VTuber who has also admitted that her entire like cry or plea on the internet is not a criticism towards most people, but it is about the common prejudices that she faces as a VTuber itself. Now I'm using the word she, but it could be a they, and I think like for context sake, let's use the word they so it's a lot more gender neutral as well. But there's a lot of assumptions that if you're able to speak English, you know, you're well educated, you are aware of American customs and taboos, you know, you might probably be American unless your accent is outright foreign. And you know, and in that sense that it's also quite common that we're seeing that American values are being placed upon us. So for example, for Southeast Asians itself, there's a lot of topics that, yeah, they don't concern us as much, but we are expected to embrace it. And one example was the recent argument towards a VTuber from Thailand who was part of a big entity, VTuber agency in, I believe it's a corporation actually, it's not an agency, a VTuber company, in entertainment company in Thailand itself. There was a concert that was actually held at a convention, which people pay to get into the convention, and that I don't think is an issue. But the video that they showed on screen itself was actually an MV recording that he did for one of the songs that he sung, and it's his voice, it's fine, but there were criticisms towards the fact that they showed that video, that it, you know, it's I guess like if you're from America and you've been exposed to Iron Mouse doing her performance in 3D, you will look at that and go like, hang on a second, that's shit. Why are you paying so much money to go to a con and you're treated to that, right? And so there were a variety of complaints on internet. I can't believe it, but it was one of the few arguments that I saw spent over like more than a week, and it was just people bitching from both sides, but it was mostly negative criticisms towards the VTuber. It was negative criticisms towards the fact that it was what they call poor showmanship, because it wasn't actually like an actual 3D performance or actual live 2D that's actually moving about. You know, no, it's a freaking MV. And people started talking about the cost, and I think that was the moment I said like, hang on, this does not make sense, because I was seeing people checking out the cost of so-called making a VTuber model that or like a 3D, sorry, more specifically a 3D model that moves and looks really pretty, and you know, they could be done at a very cheap cost of, say, I don't know, 1,500 USD, I was face palming reading that, because I feel like a lot of people tend to forget that Southeast Asia, majority of the countries here, our currency is not as strong as the USD, excluding Singapore, because that's first world country, but majority of us are third world countries. And I know a lot of people out there will say, no, you don't use the word third world countries itself. So okay, we'll use the word developing countries. We're all developing countries out there, but our currency is so weak. If I'm looking at the currency right now and I'm comparing what Malaysia currency is versus like USD currency right now, it's about a 4.6 plus exchange rate. Heck, it was, if you count like 3-4 years ago, before the pandemic itself, you're looking at anywhere between like 4 point something, maybe go up to like 4.5. It wasn't that bad, and now it's hitting a 4.6, almost close to a 5 times exchange. Like, hang on a second, I feel like Americans could come down here and be rich, whereas if me going to America, I'm a pauper on the street, man. So I feel like the value of money, and this is where the whole idea of Americanization has made it worse, is the fact that a lot of the dealings, for example, for VTubing models, right? It doesn't matter if you're an artist from the Philippines or Indonesia. A lot of times, especially if they're trying to get and attract more international customers to buy into their product, you'll notice that some of them will offer two pricings. They'll offer a USD pricing, and that's always mostly for internationals, and then they'll offer local pricing. Now, local pricing might be a little bit more cheaper than the USD pricing, but generally speaking, the USD pricing is the fixed pricing that you're going to be seeing for your artwork, for overlays, for logos, for character models, for rigging, and the minimum buy-in, oh my god, the minimum buy-in depends on which particular artist you go to. I think for a lot of more well-established artists, you do tend to see that the price starts from maybe 200 onwards. Rigging, artwork alone, let's not talk about rigging, because rigging is a beast of its own. But let's talk about artwork. Artwork can range anywhere between, and we're not talking about the cheap ones, because the cheap ones are very rare to find, but like the more expensive ones, and for good quality, you're looking at anywhere starting from like 800 USD onwards, and that is considered really good top-notch work. So forgive me if I don't like just stare at someone and be baffled by the fact that there's this huge assumption that that we could easily, afford a really expensive model. Not to mention that, with 3D modeling means you need a lot of trackers, and that the equipment is going to add up as well. I feel like this is part of the reason why you see a lot more like Southeast Asian VTubers, if they're not using VRoid, to try to start out firsthand, and those are usually artists who have a rough idea what they're doing. A lot of times you're seeing everyone else just try to make their own models itself, because they don't have the money to pay. It's a huge investment, VTubing, right? But you're in, as I mentioned, then the currency is only in USD, and so this is also, and that kind of leads to the idea of Americanization of the internet, because we have basically embraced the fact that, oh yeah, USD is the thing. Everybody should be pricing it in USD. It's the common currency. Let's go with that. But that's not just the only other problems we're facing. What other problems we're facing is, as an example, time and time again, there's a lot of times that there's a sentiment that Westerners tend to think, consciously or subconsciously, is that not only are we poor, which is fine. I think that it's okay that you think that we're poor, because we are. It's true, we are. I'm not going to deny that. But there is this aspect where they think that we are uneducated. And so a lot of times there's quite a lot of Southeast Asians that feel that, many feel that they're considered as lesser, that we are being treated without respect. And when we talk about being treated without respect, we're talking about our opinion pieces, right? We're talking about any opinions that we put out there. If, as a counter opinion, anything that we say, time and time again, if it's cultural sensitivities, especially if it's something related to Asia itself, if we bring up anything, our concerns, it doesn't matter. Westerners don't care. We can say anything that we want to say, but a Westerner will say, oh, I know better. and then they present an argument which does not make sense, right? It's hard because a lot of times, like, people are just, you know, we're just trying to be respectful. We're trying to present an argument in a way where it doesn't step toes, and we are trying to educate. But that's not the same backwards. A lot of times, maybe it's the passive aggressiveness or the passivity. I think the passive aggressiveness is quite common in Asia. So, like, we know how to be passive and tactful. A lot of people here can. Okay, I'm probably I'm probably the furthest from that, but like most people can here. But you know, every time like anyone voices it out, any kind of complaint or any opinions, we get talked over. And it's likely we're getting talked over because we're very passive. We don't voice it out in the same energy as an American would. Okay, we don't voice out the opinions in the same way as they do. And oftentimes our topics get twisted, and then it sounds as though we are purposely trying to backhand slap, people from there, and that plays into like a lot of the Americanization, the values itself, because like I feel like it's Asians where we try to be very passive as well, and we try to be polite as possible. So a lot of times you end up seeing that a lot of Southeast Asians, they tend to stay quiet, or we apologize for things even though like for voicing our opinions, we're apologizing for it. We're apologizing for something that we should not be apologetic about, because the other side or the other party won't take the argument. Now, why do I say Americanization itself? It's because that in the last couple of years, since topics like Me Too, BLM, Black Lives Matters, since all these topics came about, there has been a constant barrage of people who are very quick to cancel culture. Adopt cancel culture essentially, but they are also very quick to be prosecutive of anyone who has an opposing opinion. Me Too was one of the examples where I thought it was very interesting, because the real victims, okay, yeah, they have a right to voice out what they went through. Even BLM, like actual victims of it, it's fine. But people who are not directly involved with it, or people, let's talk about like people who have now given a platform to voice it out, start jumping on the bandwagon and start becoming the very equivalent of the toxicity that we perceive in maybe the opposing side of the argument, right? So like in terms of Me Too, we always tend to say that men are the very fossil, men are men are the gender, that. See, I don't want to say this because it feels really bad, and I feel like I'm painting a lot of guys in the bad light if I say this. But there's a lot of like male rape, a lot of rape cases that happens because like a man does it, right? But like I think since the Me Too came out, I have heard a lot more cases which are undocumented. It's very, very rare you see documented cases, but I have also seen examples of it happening where a female calls foul and attempts to do the same to a man, and it's not well documented, and men are traumatized as well. It's not like women are traumatized, but men are traumatized as well. And because of Me Too movement, it's a lot easier for an establishment to take the voice of a woman first over a man, and that means that a man can be subjected to depression, they can be subjected to mental trauma, which they can't get out easily, especially with these kind of things. And I've seen this happen to guy friends who have had that incident, and I can't help but think to myself like, oh my god, this is terrible, this should not happen, right? But imagine if they them trying to fight against the masses of people who are accusing them of being at fault. Now, are we going to be saying that, hey, there's always going to be good people on both sides of the argument? Yes, there are, but I think like this is kind of why, like in this case of like Americanization on the internet, and we're talking about mostly like with Southeast Asians itself. Southeast Asians, we kind of feel like that's really difficult, because I think that especially like Westerners, or the Americanization cultures that are coming out from America itself, on the type of cultures like Black culture, the Asian American culture. Okay, because I would like to point out Asian American is so different from like Asians in Southeast Asia, right? But like all the cultures that we're seeing there, it's so ironic that like it's like they want to be us, like people there want to be us, embracing like our cultures, and then at the same time they're also dissing us at the same time. They're looking down on us, and they're looking down on us in a way, because they're like, oh, you're not well educated enough, you don't really understand what we're saying or what we're talking about, like so you don't know what's going on. But it's like, hang on a second, you're putting it out on the internet, and it's okay if you put it out on the internet, it's fine, but maybe word your arguments a bit better, where it doesn't feel like you're trying to like slap people that are not involved with your culture as well. Like, it's okay, but how many of you are actually taking the time to also explore the other culture and understand what certain things are going on? I feel like a lot of times we are always busy trying to explore American culture. We're trying to understand what American culture is all about, and that comes into understanding why these things are important to them, values, meanings, even if it doesn't work out and make sense in a country like ours. And an example I would give is LGBT rights. I think it's great to campaign for LGBT rights. Now, am I a supporter of LGBT rights? I am 100% a supporter of it. But will it make sense for me to talk about it nonstop? No. Why? Because I live in Malaysia. And in Malaysia here, it's Islamic ruling here. There's this Islamic law here. And that means that if LGBT, they can't exist in the same hemisphere as that. So that means that as much as I would love to campaign very loudly, I don't do it. Because why? There's all that fear there. There's fear of prosecution that could happen. There is fear of prejudices, because they are most of the generation here are very religious as well, and that also means that there is a high chance of us not being able to voice it out very well without someone catching the eye and attention of the law. The law is in people who are in power in a way that won't sit well with me. Like, it will not sit well with me at all. And that's not something I want to do. I don't want to be called out for having an opinion that is the opposite of what my country has, right? But I have the right to have an opinion. I just can't voice it out. That's the beauty of the internet, which I feel like the anonymity of the internet allows for the absorption of cultures and values that we don't have. And that's why I'm A-okay with some things. But you can't always have both and expect that everybody works that way, right? There has to be an understanding towards the culture that you are projecting towards. And if someone is from another culture and saying that, hey, hang on, stop doing this to me, I'm feeling this right now, please stop. I've seen arguments as well where someone from America or a Western country comes out and tries to educate or put us in our place because we don't know better. Don't do that. Honestly, don't do that. The more you do things like this, the more it has an adverse effect towards the person who's going through it, because frankly, they're not going to I know that you mean well, maybe in terms of educating someone who doesn't quite understand, but if they are an expert of it, why are you voicing it out? They have the background in it. Do you have the background in it? So again, I don't want to go. I can spiral and I can rant and go into circles, and I do not want to go in circles. I just want to say that right now, with the way the way the social media now has been shaped, it really, from a virtual world perspective, right? It really has become a single way where now it feels like we have to represent a single nation in the world. And so it becomes as though that all of us now, when we share our internets, we're on the internet, we're sharing information, and all of the topics, the goals, everything, it's all merging into one. It's a globalization in a sense, right? But we now became united in a way where we're now interlinked. And going back to something that more specifically, because I was talking about social justice as well, right? It's a lot of cases where it really doesn't make sense because it's very synthetic. it's very synthetic after a while. And sometimes I feel it's synthetic because there's a lot of voices out there that's trying to say a piece just for the sake of saying these. It's a very American thing. I feel it's a very American thing, and this bleeds in. I swear to God that every argument I've seen on the internet right now, which is very American, and a very American nature in behavior, has become also a way for like Southeast Asians to go like, oh yeah, I'm just doing this because everybody else is on the internet doing it. Do you understand what you're doing, kids? Like, shut the fuck up. Like, pay attention. Are you sure you know what you're doing? I'm seeing that. Now, I will want to admit that it is not fair. It is not fair that I have repeatedly throughout this 30 minutes podcast have been terming it as Americanization. I'm very well aware that there will be counter arguments that will say, this is not Americanization. You can't call this Americanization. There's so many other people and so many other cultures on the internet. You cannot say Americanization is the only type of type of culture that's prevalent on the internet. And you're right, it's true. I feel like nowadays we are in a day and age where everything is coming out, where we're getting more exposure to African cultures. We're getting more exposed to Japanese and Korean cultures. China, especially soft power is getting bigger and bigger, and so that's not to say that those aren't there, but I feel that in terms of barrier breaking, right, because English is the current medium on the internet that is widely used by everybody, and America has been in the forerunning for most of the things that we see on the internet or offline or on TV, right, as media itself. So it's very easy for us to just point the finger and go like, it's America. I like to clarify, like, it's very easy for us to just point that finger at that. And it does not help that a lot of the basis of the arguments I've said outside of Southeast Asia itself has been mostly articles written with a viewpoint towards Americanization. So I'm going to wrap this up right now, where right now, in conclusion itself, I feel that with the Americanization of the internet in general, it has caused a lot of frustration for a lot of Southeast Asians, because at the end of the day, what they're feeling is that there's no breathing room out there, and there's a sense of Americans being too full of themselves. And I feel like it's a prevalent negative perspective, but it's a very increasing prevalent perspective, which does not bode well for me, in my personal opinion, because it means that we can get easily blinded by the so-called American values that are being projected big, bold, and widely on the internet, that we fail to see the important topics and arguments, and we're losing all these perspectives about on a certain piece, which could lend maybe a better understanding towards the arguments or topics. And it would be lovely if that could be toned down, but I don't see that happening anytime soon at all. So up until then, all I can hope is for the best, and that this is not something that will continue further. If you as a listener has a different opinion, or if you agree with the opinions that have been expressed in this podcast itself, and again, I would like to clarify that this was not meant to have a conclusion of that. It's just to point out that there are those feelings, there are those sentiments. Please do leave some of your comments down below. I'd love to just have an understanding of what you think are the issues or the problems there, and what you feel would have been better to tackle an issue like this, because honestly, there is no way to tackle this. I honestly feel that these kind of topics, it takes two to tango. Other than that, I will leave the resources down below as well for the articles that I did sample some of the arguments from and took some basis off, which will help you understand a little bit better about Americanization and globalization in general. Until then, take care. I will see you on my second podcast itself. Till then, bye bye.